Hey folks, you're listening to the Idea Roastery. I'm Herman.
And I'm Jason.
Jason, have you tried to learn anything recently?
Some new programming frameworks, Svelte, Remix, which is, I think, just React Router. And I think there's another one that I was looking at, Nuxt, which is like a Vue.js thing. So it's mostly been in the programming domain that I've been learning. It's been going good. Front end is still a mess.
For fear of like going down the whole front end framework rabbit hole, but like holy shit, the front end frameworks are just a complicated bag that I'm kind of steering clear of. Like I still do all my stuff server side rendered because I'm like I don't want to mess with that stuff anymore. I spent too long on that.
Yeah, so that is the dilemma I have, is that I want something that's server side, but I want it to kind of be fast. But I've tried Next.js. That's another one that I've been learning. So I've been kind of like learning the remit, and I've been trying to figure out like what is the main sort of benefit that I want to have. And I think it is like, that it's running on the server because, most people have like a resource constrained environment. So that's what I've been learning. It's mostly on the programming domain. I don't know if I've been learning anything else. Listening to audiobooks and stuff.
What's
finance.
your process for learning over there?
For programming, I'm like a dive in and just build something kind of guy.
Fair enough. You like just set yourself a bit of a goal and then you
Yes.
figure out the tools as you go along.
I am also a big advocate for podcasts and for audio learning. Actually, I've been listening to. I kind of like these like financial crime kind of audiobooks. So I've been listening to one about this dude who was, he started like the Malaysian Development Bank, but like it was like actually like a huge con. And I've been learning a little bit about building a business as I've been doing. So, but I kind of have like I read physically when it comes to like fiction. So usually before bed, it actually works really well to help me sleep. But when I'm at the gym, for instance, I listen to, finance podcasts, like VC podcasts, like those kind of things, and some of the more technical things. But sometimes I zone out and then I like lose the plot. So it's kind of a bit of a blended, and I feel like I'm more of like an auditory. I sometimes watch YouTube videos, like a kind of more visual kind of learner. I find reading just directly a little bit more challenging. But yeah, it's kind of like quite a blend, but more in kind of the auditory domains. So what about you? What have you learned recently?
So recently, to be entirely honest, not a hell of a lot. I went through a bit of an upskilling phase last year, like the last 2 quarters of last year, where I went and I did a leatherworking course and I did a woodworking course and I did I learned how to make games for the Playdate and stuff like that. But I was also working on assisting others with learning, and I'll get into that in a little bit. My approach to learning is, I'd say, fairly similar to yours. I think we can delineate it between like specific learning and general learning. So it's like when I'm listening to a podcast or watching, stuff on YouTube, I'm one of those people who's really into like the edutainment. I'll listen to a 5 hour podcast on the history of Rolex and how they built out their company and how like
Yeah.
the watch industry works. But
I listened to the same one. Yeah,
yeah,
I like
it
it.
was such a
Quiet.
goodie. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And like that's, I'd say, more general learning because I'm not sitting down with the goal of like I need to learn about watches. Instead, it's more just like following interests. Whereas if it's a specific thing that I want to learn, it's like I want to build a game for the Playdate or I want to learn how to salsa. And that I think requires, sitting down, focusing, regardless of what your learning preferences are, it's about like sitting with the problem, making a couple of mistakes, fixing those mistakes and learning from them, and progressing towards knowing more and preferably a bit of a specific goal because it helps you, maintain progress. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but I've been thinking a lot about how tech tools fit into the learning space because 2 years ago I started a company that was, or more of an organization that was attempting to use these new LLMs as a way to tutor students in mathematics and then other subjects in a high school setting. And at the time, I thought, you have a Socratic tutor. Socrates really is like, hey, here's a really good way to learn is whenever someone asks you a question, you ask one right back and help them find the answer themselves. So we created a Socratic chatbot that would help people with their mathematics homework. And over time, what was really interesting is that I actually saw the inverse of what I expected to see. I expected people to learn better, but instead they learned worse. And the reason for this is that they were trying to do too much cognitive offloading, right? They were trying to not sit with the discomfort of not knowing and instead just wanted to get their work done, or they wanted to take shortcuts. And I think with learning, while there are more efficient ways to learn, I don't think that there are shortcuts. I think that you have to sit with the problem and you have to figure it out, right?
Mm.
And so what I would see is, let's say, for instance, a student sat down with the chatbot or over WhatsApp, and they're like, I've got a right angled triangle. It's got sides A, B, and C. Oh, sorry, X, Y, and H, right? How do I find, the length of H? And the chatbot would respond
Mm.
like, well, are you familiar with the Pythagorean theorem? And they're like, no. And then the chatbot, because chatbots are, ever helpful, it's like,
Mm.
well, the Pythagorean theorem is a squared plus b squared is equal to c squared. Do you know which sides represent a, b, and c? No. Well, if you take a look at your right angle triangle and you are trying to find the hypotenuse, that would be c squared. So can you figure out which sides are a and b, x and y? It's okay, cool. And so it would just go on like this. And instead of the student actively engaging their brain more, they'd actually engage their brain less because they
Mm.
know that they can offload a lot of the thinking to this machine and
Mm.
they'd still in the end get to the correct answer potentially. Um, and so like we've actually shuttered that project and that organization. And it's been a very interesting thing thinking about learning because of that, and about attention, and about people's ability or lack thereof to actually sit with a problem and overcome the difficulty in learning that new
Mm.
thing.
What?
Have you seen anything similar, like with you or with other people?
So there's actually been a counter to that because there's been a paper that's been doing the rounds recently, and it's kind of a bit of a meta-analysis, and it was focusing on whether ChatGPT improves uh, things like being able to learn faster, whether you're able to sort of comprehend things better. And it was pretty positive, although it was a meta-analysis, which means they took papers and kind of just like had a like overall view. It was only about 51 papers, but it did seem that it was actually quite positive in the learning journey. But it seemed like the main sort of caveats is that it helps with meeting a student where their needs are. So it was able to kind of yes, everyone knows that they learn differently, and so being able to sort of have something that caters to their needs. But there was obviously cons in that, and I think this is maybe what was more likely is that the cons, such as plagiarism, obviously, and just like technology dependence were also like mentioned as some of the caveats. But overall, the paper was like, yeah, like ChatGPT should be used everywhere. But it also seems like there's certain tasks that it seems to be better suited for. So like, as you said, like particular problem solving tasks it can help with. But what might be an issue with that scenario that you mentioned is more about motivation rather than necessarily being about solving the problem. And I think maybe that's where schooling and education. The other caveat for the paper was that they didn't actually look at primary school. They only looked at high school and university, where I think most of the time it's like, yeah, use ChatGPT in order to help you to comprehend this sort of higher level, sort of abstract problem, and then try and solve like some solution. But then it was like, yeah, it's this whether people are like engaged in the process of learning, which I guess if you're in university and maybe in high school, you kind of already are a little bit engaged, but maybe that engagement was not necessarily there in that case.
So that's interesting in that I'm wondering I would be very interested in looking at that meta-analysis because I have
Mm,
also read a bunch of studies recently on AI assisted learning as part of this journey that I've been on. And one of the things that one of them that really stood out to me was they split groups into having AI assistants and not having AI assistants
mm,
in let's call it doing their assignments and then followed by a non-AI assisted test. And what they
mm,
found is that people who had access to AI assistants did significantly better in their assignments.
mm,
But when tested afterwards without AI assistance, they did significantly worse. And
mm.
the sort of conclusion over there is that, like, yes, you can output better work if you do have AI assistance,
Yeah.
but that less actual tangible learning happens. And that's kind of what I've found to be true as well. The second one being especially for uh, high school and also university for people who feel like they like university is just, a way to get access to the job market,
Mm,
is university professors are getting sick and tired of people submitting AI generated um, uh, assignments, right? And so all the assignments
mm.
where learning needs to be done kind of have to be done in a controlled environment because students will a certain percentage, and the certain percentage is, more than half, will use AI generation to write their assignment for them. Weirdly enough,
Mm,
on my blogging platform, I actually had blocked a blog because it was AI generated goop, and I got an
mm,
email, and it was from a student who was like, "Hey, I started a blog on your platform, and it's for my assignment for university. Can you unblock it?" And I went and I looked at it, and it's just AI generated goop. And I ended up sending an email to the guy saying, like, "Listen, if I were your professor, I'd fail you on this because this is
oof.
obviously AI generated." And I was expecting but I unblocked his blog, and then he sent back to me. He's like, "Hey, thank you very much for that. I am going to go and rework it, and thanks for the honesty, um,
Mm,
et cetera, et cetera." But it's like, I feel that, let's take, for instance, writing. Writing is a very powerful tool for internalizing information. If I say, go and write 4 pages on the Anglo-Boer War, right,
mm.
is you, by the end of writing those 4 pages, if you didn't just copy and paste stuff from ChatGPT or Wikipedia, is you'll reasonably know about the Anglo-Boer
Yeah.
War. Whereas if you just got AI to generate this stuff for the Anglo-Boer War, you're
Yeah.
not really learning anything.
Yeah. In your project, I wanted to ask is like how are you measuring the outcomes? Because I think there's a little bit of a outcome kind of like discussion here is like
Mm.
whether like what is it that we are measuring when it comes to like are we improving like
Yeah.
outcomes, right? Because I think it's like yeah.
So we had a lot of discussions about like actually measuring outcomes. The problem is that this is an anonymous service because we were working with underage students,
Yeah.
right? And so we couldn't like go and check their test scores before and after, even though we really wanted to have that information. So
Mm,
instead, and this is, more based on vibes than anything else, but I would do a perusal of conversations that were had. So I would essentially
mm,
like filter by conversations that were more than 5 messages long, and
mm,
then go and, read a portion of them to see what was going on. And uh, every and this is going to sound like I'm being dramatic, but I'm actually not being dramatic. Every single conversation that I read, it felt like the student was just trying to get the AI to give it the answer, right? And
mm.
in none of the cases did I feel like actual learning was going on. And this could just be, a me perception thing. But in
Yeah.
every case, it didn't feel like the student was contributing anything meaningful to the conversation or doing the steps that they needed to do. Instead, they were just trying to poke the chatbot to do their work for them up
Mm.
until the point that they were happy with the result that they had, that they could submit their homework, or they would just give up, knowing that this tutor is a Socratic interface.
Yeah. So part of that analysis that I read was that the effects they did note that the effects of AI on learning was between 4 and 8 weeks. And I think again, I feel like it's coming back to what is like the mindset of that student. And I think maybe it could be like a fault of the schooling system as it is that
Completely.
when you're that young, you just see it as like, I just need to pass this test, or I just need to do this thing. I don't want to do it. I'd rather be outside playing and kicking a ball. And so I think maybe in the early phases, they're just like, okay, I know I can Google search this and go out to it. And so maybe there is that, like, over time, maybe they do realize like, oh, this is like, actually more interesting because I can ask it about, like, where would I use this in real life? Or maybe it is just a prompting thing, because I think I've seen a few threads saying that, like, as normal people, they don't really know how to prompt these things. I see, lay people doing all these prompts, and they just say they don't quite do it in a way that will get the best result out of that LLM. And maybe it's just the fact that they don't know that, hey, try ask it about, like, how you can apply this to like a fantastical kind of scenario.
So here's an interesting way to think about it, right? And you're entirely right, to say that, a lot of people are just trying to do this to get it done, right? Like, I've both lectured at universities, and I've briefly taught some high school extracurricular stuff, and I've also worked with adults at a startup mentoring, sorry, at a tech incubator, mentoring them on their startups. And what I found really interesting is that both high school and university level, the vast majority of people are actually not there to learn. They're there to get a degree, right? And there is like a big distinction over there. So, for example, I was lecturing first year programming. And I go in there and I have like a really good setup. We're learning how to control game objects in a game using scripts and implement physics and stuff like that. Really, really cool stuff. Really engaging. I put a lot of effort into it. And some people are engaging with the content, other people aren't necessarily engaging with the content. But like at the end of well, near the end of the session, there's a question. And I'm like, yeah, it's like, is this going to be on the test? And I'm like, no. And immediately everyone just checked out because
Yeah.
and this is a fault of the education system, but it's also understandable. It's like, I feel like even me, and I would say I'm a fairly uh, motivated person, is that university, like, I kind of just wanted to pass, right? But because I didn't have access to ChatGPT, I still had to do all of my projects myself, right?
Yeah.
And so it kind of forced me into learning this thing that I'd set out to do, even though I was incredibly resistant to learning. And I think that that's actually the thing over there, is that I think, especially when you're younger, you're incredibly resistant to learning. And these are just tools and techniques that we have to kind of force learning upon you, right? Um, and I feel like we've just kind of lost a bit of access to, let's take, for instance, homework, right? Like,
Yeah.
people, you can't give students homework anymore because they have access to ChatGPT at home, right? So you kind of have to do all the learning in class.
That's true. Although, like, I've seen, certain failures of AI models, because I think, was it the strawberry test of like
Oh
how
yeah,
many
how many
R's?
hours does it have?
And I think, but it's quite interesting seeing like this sort of back and forth with the plagiarism space. Like, obviously we know about the M dash and this like long dash that's now inserted into
Everywhere.
everywhere. And it's so much so that it kind of like, I'm seeing people that I've been following for years, like, and it's it's like, it's the fact that you don't know that it's authentic is also like part of what's really upsetting me a bit. Is
Yeah.
like people have committed time to some platforms like Reddit and Twitter and all these kind of things, and then you start to realize, oh, maybe just people are just pumping out content and stuff. And I think it's the same maybe in the academic space. Is like, if you're not super engaged in the subject matter, and you have kind of, maybe you've screwed around a bit, you went out drinking a few more times that you did, and then suddenly you realize that you've only got like a couple of days left. I think, I mean, even like plagiarisms have happened before as well. Like, in my university there was lots of cases of people like copying each other's homework, and it was quite common back then to do that.
It is, and I think that the people copying each other's homework is actually a really good example of this, is that it was prevalent in my university as well. And
Yeah.
whenever I copied someone else's homework, like no learning was done for me. But like
Mm.
sometimes you couldn't find someone's homework to copy and you just had to do it
Yeah.
yourself, right?
Yeah.
But
Exactly.
now no one ever doesn't have someone else to do their homework for them,
Yeah.
right? So it's kind of that.
But I guess the question I have is like, does it matter, right? Or why do you think it matters? Because I think if we live in an outcome based world where people are saying, oh, I want to be judged for the work I produce rather than how I do it. Kind of in the remote working vibe situation. People like,
Mhm.
well, if I do this and I get these results, doesn't matter how I did it or when I did it. Like if that is what society is requesting, is it like even does it even matter that you learn it or whether an AI does it for you?
I actually do have a good response for that. And this is going to change since these models are moving so fast. But just to humor me for a moment. Um, let's assume, just for this hypothetical, that AI models stop where they are right now. We've hit the ceiling of what is possible, and it's just going to carry on going forward like this. So what I've noticed is that junior developers don't have to sit with problems anymore. They just ask, one of these AI models to solve the issue for them. But now the way that you become a senior developer or an experienced developer is you have to go and you have to, you've had this happen to you a few times before, I'm sure, where it's like multiple
Mm.
days where you cannot solve something, and then you've gone through all of Stack Overflow and all of, all these obscure forums until you finally figure out the answer, and then you're like, yes, I figured it out. And but in that process of doing that, you've explored how Django middleware works down
Mm.
to, the bare metal and how compilers work, et cetera, et cetera. But
Mm.
now junior developers who are just coming into the workforce now, they have an easy out for figuring out and solving these problems. But now there
Mm.
are much bigger problems that are really, call it almost impossible for junior developers to figure out. And that's where those senior developers come in.
Mm.
And that's why I am arguably still a much better programmer than an AI model is because I'm agentic and I understand these systems and the context in which they exist. So in this hypothetical where these models never get any smarter, because they'll at some point they're going to be better than me at programming. Like I have no doubt about it.
Yeah.
But if they didn't, the way that you become a senior developer is you start out as a junior developer and you kind of cut your teeth on all these difficult things. And I kind of get the feeling that we're going to see fewer people become senior developers or become experienced developers because they never had to cut their teeth on any of this. And they don't have to learn how, let's take, for instance, information passing works in React because they just generate it, right?
Mm. Yeah.
And I think like I actually have a theory over here, and we'll see how this plays out in the next 5 to 10 years. But I feel like the people who are currently the senior programmers, the experienced developers, is we're kind of the last generation of senior developers because while
Mm.
we still have a place in the market right now, junior developers are going to have a really hard time becoming senior developers. And also, we are going to become less and less relevant until such a time as we are irrelevant. And
Yeah.
so it's kind of like we may be the last generation of experienced devs.
I think we're quite fortunate in that sense because I think we are, yeah, we've just like we were there, we just got like a brief glimpse of not having mobile phones in our sort of early childhood development, and we
Yeah.
managed to we got them almost at the best time because it seems like around 17, 18 is the kind of the best time to have like a cell phone, so we kind of like got in on the right time, and now we've got programming skills, and it's turning out that as you said, junior developers are like not be able to get jobs because you can just have a senior developer that does most of the juniors' work, and so
Assisted
it's
by
almost
AI,
like
yeah.
the drawbridge has been pulled up behind us, and we're kind of in this like really niche place where we have the expertise that we can kind of dive deeper if we need to, but we kind of know the overall architecture. And so, yeah, I think we will be in this hopefully, maybe I'm just talking my own book because I want to get, I might want to get hired at one point. But like, it's like we're in this like unique space where we'll be able to straddle both worlds. And maybe it is like, maybe that's means that it's the death of the T-shaped knowledge curve, I guess, where you have like broad knowledge in a lot of things and you have like a very deep knowledge
Specific
in
knowledge,
one
yeah.
specific area. And I think also from my own usage of ChatGPT and these things while I learn, I think it's kind of good because it does help with general understanding. So if you think of like I was taught these like you either have a top-down perspective or a bottom-up perspective when it comes to learning. So you either start from like fundamental like physics principles and you like build up and you build up and you build up, or you say like, oh, what's the lay of the land, and you say like, okay, well, what's this component? What's this component? And you kind of like start drilling down. And so I find that the language models are maybe more better at this like general getting a grasp of the overlying kind of scenarios and then going down. But maybe at a certain point you will hit, the limits of knowledge for the language model, and then that's where you're going to have to rely on your own. You're on your own, buddy, and you have to go down deeper into that. And so I think it's actually good if that is the case, because I think we spoke about it once or twice on the podcast. It's like there's so much to learn for like, for instance, like physics, right? Physics is evolving. Like if you had to think about like going from, or like the physics we learned in high school all the way up to like modern day physics, which is kind of the way that you have to do it because you have to build up on all of these different parts. It's like almost like, it's a lot of work, right? And to fundamental sort of AI research, imagine like having to like relearn every step. So being able to kind of comprehend these like sort of general concepts, I think it is going to be good to have the help of a language model.
And don't misunderstand is, like these are incredibly useful tools and they do definitely make information access super easy and useful. And I do use them a lot. It's interesting, like no other tool has become immediately as useful as these large language models have.
Yeah.
I think that there is, however, thinking specifically about learning, is there is access to knowledge is not the same as learning that said knowledge. It's like if you give 100 students a library card to a library that has all of the information and knowledge that they could potentially want, only one or maybe zero will end up becoming a physicist at NASA, right? And that's kind of where we are, where we have been, at least for the last 20 years with the internet, right? Everyone in the world pretty much has access to all of humanity's collective knowledge. And yes, it's been really useful because people who are interested in learning and do want to find novel and interesting information can do that. But I'd say for the vast majority of people, like they really just want to have a safe space to lay their head and take care of themselves and their families. And
yeah, true. But I mean, you could argue you could get that with search. I think people were always like saying like Google search is like killing education because you could always just Google something.
And this is just the next level on top of that. It's like search, but on steroids. It tells you exactly what you want to know.
Yeah, exactly.
And then also reasons about it for you.
Yeah, I think just to wrap up, I guess, what would be some of the trends that you're looking out for in the next couple of months when it comes to AI learning? Like, what are the things that you kind of excited about, or what would like change your mind where you say like, absolutely, we have to have this in every school at every level?
So one of the trends that's been really interesting has actually been the opposite of that. Is how in the late 2010s, early 2020s, primary and high schools were all going like digital first, and all the students would have a laptop or a tablet, and they'd get their textbooks on there, et cetera, and they'd do a lot of digital-based learning. We're starting to see a lot of schools reversing that and getting rid of all devices, and instead going back to like paper and pencil, and printed out, assignments, et cetera. And I think that that's for multiple reasons. The one that we've been discussing is obviously just like access to too much information and not enough learning. But the second one is just too much distraction. Like devices are inherently distracting. When you have access to all the, not just the information in the world, but all the entertainment in the world at your fingertips,
Yeah.
it's hard to control yourself. And so I think that these tools, these digital tools are really good for educators because it can help them be more productive, right? But when it comes to learning, I'm actually very much here for a return to like physically writing things with your hand. And there's
Oh
something
yeah.
about that. And I know that this has been studied. They have shown that like taking notes with your hand, like by with pen and paper, does tend to lead to like better recollection.
Yeah.
But you know, these studies all are a little there are a lot of confounding factors, but it
Yeah.
is still interesting. And I will definitely say that like teaching students how to focus, especially in the world that we currently live in with so much like rapid access to entertainment, being able to focus
Mm,
on a task for long periods of time is going to be a superpower. It already is.
I know. I think you make a very valid point, and I'm actually like unsure how it will go because I remember so when I don't know if you had the same, you probably did when you did like English, we had that English literature essays that we did at the end of high school, where you put in a room for 3 hours, and your job is to like write, a short sort of interrogative essay. You have to write like a long creative narrative essay, and you had to do this with over 3 hours. I think the point you're making, which I agree, is that we've maybe lost the ability to concentrate for that long. So I was thinking about it like, yeah, I think we do need to go back. But if you're going to ask like a kid these days who are all kind of like coming out with these ADHD diagnoses and, they can't sit still for more than like an hour, are they even going to be able to do like a 3 hour like essay like we did back in the day? And I think it's going to have to be. And I do also agree that, yeah, the AI world is almost going to sort of crash into the remote first world that we have, because although you do have an AI like right next to it in your iPad is, TikTok
Yeah.
or like Instagram and YouTube. So yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting one. And I'd like to see, I guess, more. I'd like to understand more about how it's used from the educator's point of view, because I think it is
Mm.
like, when it comes to creativity, coming up with like exciting ways to present material. Maybe not in maths and science, because I mean maybe maths, because maths is like, it's pretty much here's the numbers. You don't need to have that much creativity. Maybe like when you're trying
Oh, I
to.
don't know. Like those are fighting words. I'm sure some mathematicians would break down your door and kneecap you for saying that.
I know physics, they've always got like they can show a science experiment, and then you got the kids. Like kids are like, wow, like let's go.
But yeah, for high school level math, you don't necessarily need creativity. You just need to learn how to do math.
Exactly. And I think I'd also like to see the efficiency gains, because I think it will help a lot of people to, you know, uh, move at their own pace. And so seeing how that evolves into whether it's, across the board, or, just for specific use cases. But
Mm.
yeah, I'm overall positive, but yeah, we'll see how it goes.
We certainly will.
Cheers, dude.